G'day, it's Geoff Lewis here from Seriously Series. I'm just going over some content for the next 6 months for videos that we're going to be putting up to YouTube and particularly on Patreon. One of the things I thought that you guys and girls might find of interest is how we actually come up with the content. There's a lot of people obviously bringing out videos similar to ours in some ways, but obviously we have our own unique twist on a lot of common subjects. The key thing for me that I draw on for inspiration is books that I've read over the years. And these are the items that I wanted to talk about today. Obviously for me, compared to a lot of other, YouTubers and video vloggers and all the rest, my background is slightly different to theirs. I'm not saying I'm better than them, I'm just saying it is slightly different. And obviously, due to that, we bring a different flair and a different type of content to you. And some of you have been really enjoying it. And for those of you who have left comments below, thank you very much. I can't thank you enough. It's always good hearing some feedback, whether it's good or bad. We're all human. We need to hear if there's bad things, and it's fantastic if there's good things. So what got me all started? What got me started in coming up with content and going off and doing adventures? Well, really for me, it comes down to one book. And this is probably showing my age a little bit. Not that age is a bad thing, it's only a number. But I read a book and it was The Long Way Down. Not Long Way Down, Long Way Round, with Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman. And at the time I was doing a trip from Darwin down to Tasmania, driving all the way. And reading the book was a real eye-opener for me. I was going through obviously a lot of challenging country, and they were too, and many of the struggles that they were having I was having to come across also. So it was a really good book, and it really opened my eyes up to the fact that, you know, a lot of the magazines here in Australia talk about subjects and obviously destinations in Australia, but it is actually possible to do overland and expeditions, not just in one country, but across the entire globe. So this really opened up my eyes, and I thought this is just absolutely fantastic. And after I finished that trip all the way back down to Tassie from Darwin, I then went out and led my first little expedition with a couple mates and a few other blokes, and we went and did the west coast of Tassie. We had no idea what we were doing. We had a rough idea where we were going, and did we know really what we were doing with four-wheel drive recovery? We like to think we did, but you learn a lot over the years, and you find out what you did then probably isn't the best thing or the way that you would do it now. So that was a real inspirational book for me. Obviously the next book that I read, which was similar in some content, was actually this book here, and I've mentioned this guy before, Francis, I think it's Birtles, and this is a fantastic read. It doesn't matter whether you're an Australian or not. If you're one of our international viewers and you enjoy a really good boys' own adventure, get a copy. It's well worth it. It's quite well written for what it is. It covers a lot of interesting content, and what this guy actually did is absolutely fantastic. He rode all the way across Australia, and this is actually, I think it was 1910, he went from South Australia all the way up to Darwin on push bike. He did it on push bike. Amazing. Boer War veteran. He ended up driving all the way from London to Melbourne, or maybe it was Sydney, in a Beam motor car. So it wasn't four-wheel drive, it was actually a roadster, two-wheel drive. And going through Burma, he couldn't actually get up the hills. So what he did, and it's been a while since I've read the book, so the details might be a bit sketchy in the following, but basically what he did is he converted his gearbox so he had one forward gear, which used to be reverse, because reverse is a lower ratio than first gear in most cars, and then he had 4 reverse gears, and then he took the back wheels off his beam motor car and then actually got a file and carved slots in the drums so you could put chains through. So this actually changed the gear ratio, and the chains would dig into the mud, and to get up these hills he would spend weeks, a week or 2 weeks, cutting a track all the way up the hill, and then he would charge at it and drive up to the top, and then once he got to the top of the hill he would then wrap rope around the drum and put it in reverse and slowly lower the car all the way down to the bottom of the valley and then start all over again. Like, it's just incredible. This guy got caught in sandstorms out towards the Simpson Desert, and he did it all in a Model T Ford. It's a fantastic read. I can't recommend it enough. If you're an adventurer, or you like to think you are, definitely get it. Definitely. It's fantastic, fantastic read. After that got me really interested in sort of Asia, and particularly around Burma and all the rest, because there is information on it, but it's just got such an elusive history to it. And obviously most Land Rover owners have read this little book, and it's a fantastic book. This is called the First Overland, which obviously in reference to the last book kind of proves it isn't, but anyway, it's still a fantastic read. And this is obviously about the Oxford-Cambridge expedition, and I think it was 4 or 5 blokes that drove all the way from London to Singapore back in 1955, and it was in Land Rover Series 1s. One of my favourite extracts was obviously when they were going through Burma, and they went on the Stillwell Road, and this road was one of the most expensive roads built during World War II, and basically it had fallen all the way back to the jungle. The jungle had consumed this road, and they were driving along and they were having to dodge headhunters, and these headhunters still used blow darts back then, and just awesome. And they ended up getting a Burma Army escort, and they had a World War II Willys Jeep, and anyway they ended up fixing the Jeep, and the soldiers were a little bit cavalier with their guns, so they ended up taking the guns off them too. So it's a fantastic read, a really good one. The good thing about it too is it actually comes with a lot of detail. It comes with detail on actually how they prepared for the expedition, and actually all the equipment that they took. Now many of you probably think, oh my gosh, it's 60 years ago, none of it's relevant. Well, it actually is. There's actually quite a lot to be learnt in this, and some of the equipment, yes, might be a bit outdated by today's standards, but the thing that I find fascinating about these stories, and particularly Francis Birtles, is how little they went out and did these expeditions with. You know, we moan and groan about, you know, a fridge breaking down. These guys didn't have refrigeration. You know, they lived on dehydrated food. These guys had, for 6 months, they had, what was it, compressed oats to make their porridge. They didn't even have proper oats. So it's fantastic. When you look at that, it really puts into perspective how easy we've got it today. So that's a fantastic read. I'd recommend that one. After that, I started getting a lot more fascinated with Arnhem Land. And for those of you who don't know what Arnhem Land is, it's not actually in Belgium. I think Arnhem's in Belgium. No, it's not actually in Belgium. It's actually located just, it would be east of Darwin. And it encapsulates a huge proportion of the actual Northern Territory. And it was set up as an Aboriginal reserve, I believe, in 1936. I stand corrected though. The first cop to actually go to Arnhem Land, or policeman, was a guy by the name of Sid Carr-Little. And he actually wrote an account of his adventures in Arnhem Land. And this is called Whispering Wind. And this is a fantastic book about survival, and it is just incredible. It's a page turner from start to finish, and just the actual culture that he had to sort of get initiated in with the local Aborigines, because these were Aborigines at that point in time who were living under their own law. And I'm not going to go into the politics of all the rest and how things have changed over the years, but it is a fantastic read. Having to do foot patrols for hundreds of kilometres through croc-infested swamps, having carriers that he had for carrying his equipment die and perish, and then getting one account I remember was he had supplies dropped in, but instead of putting parachutes attached to them, they forgot to do that, and so all his supplies just got smashed in front of him and they nearly starved. But they were able to find a water buffalo and kill the water buffalo, and that's what kept them alive. So Whispering Wind, good read. Now, anyone who owns a series Land Rover in Australia will be loving this next book. They really will. And reading this book was a real inspiration for me to keep doing these videos with Damon, and for Damon too. And obviously many of you have probably heard or watched or grew up with the Leyland brothers. And anyway, here it is. Mel Leyland, Still Travelling. This is a fantastic book. Very well written, very interesting content. For those of you who don't know, Mel Leyland is sadly the remaining Leyland brother. And Mel and Mike Leyland actually set out in 1962, and they actually went down the longest river in Australia, the Darling River. After that, they completed the first east-west crossing at a particular latitude, and they were the first people to actually cross the Simpson Desert, and they did this in Series 1 and Series 2 Land Rovers. They went through something like 5 differentials in the Land Rover Series 1, and they nearly perished. Countless other adventures too. It's a fantastic read. If you're looking at travelling around Australia and getting a bit of inside information on what it used to be like, this is a brilliant read. I would really recommend it. You can get it in audio book too, which I've also bought because I do a lot of driving, and Mel Leyland actually reads the book from start to finish, which I found out with Arnold Schwarzenegger's Total Recall. His autobiography only actually reads the first chapter, so you're getting your money's worth with this one. So very good read. So what am I reading at the moment? Where are we getting the content for the next series? Well, obviously Edge of the Earth, we've got to do part 2 because the bridge got washed away in part 1, which was rather inconvenient. And we've got to see, did the egg and the pepper actually hold up in the radiator? Well, the suspense is killing me, I don't know about you. But what I'm actually reading is Where Dead Men Lie. And this is actually Mike and Mel Leyland's book that they wrote on their 1966 expedition across Australia. A lot of the books that you've obviously noticed that I read are from people who travelled 50, 60, 70 years ago. And why am I not reading something that's a bit more current? And why are some of the methods that I talk about a little bit old hat and old school when you can find modern means of getting around it? Well, basically there's no challenge. To be honest, you can hop in a modern motor vehicle and drive from, a friend of mine just did it. He drove all the way from Perth to Melbourne in 3 days. There's no challenge. You've got to go out there and you've actually got to earn your right to cross Australia. You've got to earn your right to get through the Simpson Desert, And reading these books, it's really inspirational. These guys travelled for 6 months to get from Steve Point, which is the westernmost point, all the way over to Byron Bay, or Cape Byron, which is the most eastern point in Australia. Something like, I think it's 5,000 kilometres. And they didn't have fridges, they didn't even have an esky. They didn't have an esky because the ice would melt. So they actually used salted meat, and they shot kangaroos along the way. And they had to come up with their own recovery means of actually getting up over the sand dunes in the Simpson Desert, which wasn't easy. I think that took them 6 weeks to cross the Simpson Desert. You can do it in something like probably 5 days now, which is pretty impressive. And for those of you who don't know what the Simpson Desert is, it's actually the largest moving sand dune system in Australia. It's massive. It's a massive area, and it is still very much a barrier and very much an adventure to try and cross it. But hundreds of people do it each year now, and there's tag-along tours, and there's people saying that it's corrugated and all the rest. And I did it when I was a teenager, or I did half of it, and even then it was corrugated and getting cut up. So it's just what happens. More places become accessible, more people want to travel to them, so it's just what happens. But it's fantastic reading what these guys actually went through and had to actually come up against. Really not that long ago, 50 odd years ago, a bit over 50 years ago, which is within living memory. That's not that long ago. So and it provides a lot of solutions, simple solutions to a lot of complex problems. And I guess one example of that is obviously the water bag, the canvas water bag. A lot of people have these huge fridges nowadays, and if you can fit it in your car, if you can run it in your car, why not? Go ahead, do it. But instead of putting 4 or 5 litres in there, you can have a canvas water bag, and it'll keep it cool. So there's little things like that. It's not for everyone though. It's some people put comments below going, that's so backward, but I quite like it. But that's my opinion. That's not fact. That's just an opinion. So I think it's fantastic. But you can learn a lot from these books. This one here is obviously Off the Beaten Track, which is one I bought, which is where the Leyland brothers went through the Kimberley region and actually crossed what is now called the Gibb River Road. They actually rolled Land Rover on that trip, and they had to use not a winch, they used a block and tackle to winch the Land Rover back up, and they got through it. And then this other version of Off the Beaten Track, the next series, they went up Cape York and they gutted out the Series 3, and then they actually towed it across the Jardine. Oh, that one I won't mention, there's a Jeep in that. But this guy here, Les Hiddens, or actually I'll show this one. Les Hiddens, Roaming the Outback, Brett is obviously a great fan of his, and I am a mad fan of Les Hiddens too. When I was a kid, I would come home from school and I would watch his documentaries, and they're fantastic. I've got all the DVDs. I think they're absolutely brilliant. He functions very much on the principle of KISS, keep it simple, stupid, and I'm a firm believer in that. But basically what this guy did is he travelled all the way over, all across Australia. He started off in, and Duncan will like this, he started off in a FJ45 because it was a long wheelbase, it wasn't a short wheelbase. If it's a short wheelbase, it's a shorty 40. And then in the early 1980s, the Army had the Parenti, which came out, and he travelled all over the top end of Australia cataloguing bush tucker or bush food and survival means in a Land Rover Parenti. And that is one of the reasons why I thought I always want to have or get a military Land Rover. And I have. So my dreams come true. So it's fantastic. So there's a lot to be learnt out there, and basically there's no possible way of containing all the information. But I definitely recommend looking at some of these older books, and obviously some of these new releases too that I've showed you also. But looking at where we've come from gives us a good idea of where we're going to in the future. And looking at some of these simple means of how people got around in the past really offers us a fair bit of comfort nowadays. We can walk into an ARB accessory store and we can pick up, you know, a already built kit with our recovery gear. We can simply go through a book and pick out what accessories we want to put out on our vehicle. You know, we don't have to worry about, you know, hanging a wire up in a tree and then making sure the crystals are at the right temperature to make a radio phone call to the Royal Flying Doctors just to let them know that we're alive, which is what Mike and Mel Leyland had to do. So it really puts into context where we've come and what we have to be grateful for. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, if you want to be a part of what we do here at Seriously Serious and be involved in the content that we come up with, please join us on Patreon. And if not, follow us on YouTube by subscribing, and feel free to keep up to date through Facebook. Anyway, I'll catch you later on.